Welcome to the deep dive. Looks like we're taking a deep dive into Jurat notarizations today. You sent us a ton of stuff, articles and guides, and even some Wikipedia entries. Looks like you're really trying to figure these out.
Yeah, they can be tricky.
So let's get to it. Uncover the secrets of the Jurat. Everything from their ancient beginnings to their digital future.
You know, Jurats are interesting. They go beyond a signature, right? It's more like raising your right hand and swearing to the truth of everything in a document.
Right. It's like making a promise that what you're saying is true.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know what I noticed? The word acknowledgement keeps coming up in these sources. It's always alongside Jurat. So what's the difference between the two? They both involve a notary public, right?
Yeah, they both do. But there is a pretty important difference. Think of it this way. An acknowledgement is like confirming you ordered a pizza, but a Jurat, that's swearing you didn't eat the whole thing yourself.
That's a great way to put it. Makes it much easier to understand.
Yeah, and that article from the California Lawyers Association, it had a perfect example. You remember Julie and Sean?
Yeah, the joint dentist.
Yeah. When Julie passes away, Sean needs to prove that he's the sole owner of their house, right?
Right. He needs to file an affidavit of death.
Exactly. And that affidavit has to have a Jurat notarization because it's a sworn statement about a major legal event, Julie's death. And it has some huge implications for who gets to own the property.
So a juror is kind of a big deal then.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about signing a piece of paper. It's about making a solemn promise.
Right. So how does this whole Jurat process work in practice? The Blue Notary Guide seems to lay it out step by step.
It does, and those steps are there for a reason. You know, they're there to protect everyone involved and make sure everything is done properly.
Okay, so walk me through it.
All right, so first up, the notary public. They absolutely have to make sure that you are who you say you are. That means checking a government-issued ID, like a driver's license or a passport.
So no sneaking past with your library card then?
Not a chance.
Okay, so you've shown your ID. What's next?
Next up, the notary needs to watch you sign the document. This is to ensure that no one's forcing you or putting any pressure on you. It has to be a completely free and willing signature.
So you're signing in front of the notary. What comes after that?
This is where it gets really serious. This is the oath. The notary will ask you to swear or affirm, and this basically means that you are promising that everything in the document is completely true, and you are acknowledging that you understand that there could be legal penalties if you're lying. So it's that moment when a simple document turns into this really powerful legal statement.
It's like that moment in a movie when the character places their hand on a Bible in court.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
So it's way more than just signing on the dotted line. There's real weight behind a Jurat.
Absolutely. And to wrap it all up, the notary fills out a certificate confirming that everything was done according to the rules, and this becomes part of the document itself.
So it's like a seal of approval from the notary.
Exactly. It's like their stamp of authenticity saying, yep, I was there, I saw it all happen, and everything checks out.
Okay, so we've got the ID check, the signing the oath, and the certificate. Seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's a well-defined process.
But hold on. But the Blue Notary Guide and that website for engineer seal stamps, they mentioned something about notary stamps and like Jurat statements. Are those just for decoration, or is there actually like a purpose behind them?
They're definitely more than just decoration. The stamp is like the notary's signature move. It usually has their name, commission number, and the date their commission expires. All the essential information right there on the stamp.
So it's like a shortcut so they don't have to write all that out by hand every single time.
Exactly. Plus, it helps to keep things consistent and accurate, making sure every document has those key details right there.
Makes sense. But what about the Jurat statement? What is that all about?
Ah, the Jurat statement. It's like a mini summary of the whole Jurat process. It's usually a short paragraph right there in the document, and it confirms that you, as the signer, you were there in front of the notary public, and that you showed your ID, and that you swore that oath. It's all there, nice and tidy.
So it's like the notary saying, yep, everything happened just like it should have.
That's it. They work together, the stamp and the statement, to add that extra layer of authenticity and reassurance.
Makes sense. It's like a double check system.
You got it. It's all about ensuring that everything is done by the book. But here's where things get a little tricky. The Blue Notary Guide mentions that Jurat requirements, well, they can actually differ from state to state.
Wait, really? I thought something this important would be standardized across the board.
You would think so, right? But states like California and Florida, they have their own specific rules and regulations for Jurats. It's like each state has its own flavor of notarization.
Right, you really need to be careful and make sure you're following the rules for the right state.
Absolutely. Getting those details wrong could create some serious legal headaches down the road.
Okay, so we've covered the basics, but there's one thing that really caught my eye. The Wikipedia article mentioned something called electronic jurats on tax returns. What exactly is an electronic jurat?
It's basically a sign of the times. Even something as traditional as notarization is being transformed by technology.
So instead of physically signing in front of a notary, you're swearing to the truthfulness online.
That's it. And the Wikipedia article used tax forms as an example. Imagine skipping printing out those huge documents and signing them all digitally.
Sounds way more convenient. But is it actually legal? How do you even prove who you are online?
It is legal, and it's becoming increasingly common, actually. And to verify your identity, they use things like knowledge-based authentication. You answer questions that only you would know, like, what street did you live on in 2015? That kind of thing.
So it's like a digital detective making sure you're really you.
Precisely. And some systems even use biometrics, like facial recognition, to compare your face to your ID photo. It's all about security and making sure that online notarization is just as secure as the traditional in-person process.
This is incredible. So you're telling me the future of Jurats is heading online?
It definitely seems that way. And that brings us to something even more interesting: remote online notarizations.
Ron. I've heard that term before, but I can't quite place it.
Picture this: you're on your couch relaxing and you suddenly need to get a document notarized.
It happens all the time.
Right. Well, with Ron, you can connect with a notary online through video chat and have your document notarized remotely. Companies like Blue Notary, for example, they offer platforms specifically for this.
Wait, you're telling me I could get a document notarized without even leaving my house?
That's right. Ron is gaining popularity because it's convenient and accessible. As long as you and the notary are in states that allow it, it's perfectly legal.
That's amazing.
It really is.
But hold on. How do you know someone's not faking their identity online? Couldn't anyone just hold up a fake ID to their webcam?
That's a valid concern. But that's where these platforms really step up their game. They use some pretty sophisticated technology to combat fraud.
Like what kind of technology?
Well, they use things like credential analysis. They check your ID against databases to make sure it's legitimate. And then there are those biometric comparisons we talked about, like facial recognition. It's like having a whole team of digital detectives working behind the scenes to make sure everything is secure.
Sounds like they're pulling out all the stops.
They are. And as the demand for remote services keeps growing, Ron is only going to become more common in the future. Who knows? Maybe we'll even see AI-powered notaries one day.
AI notaries. Wow, that's something to think about. But for now, let's go back to the basics for a second. You mentioned that the Jurat statement is like a summary of the process.
Right. It's like the TLDR of the Jurat world.
Exactly. Could you break that down a bit more for me? Like, what exactly does it say, and why is the wording so important?
You're right. The language in a Jurat statement, it's super important because it becomes the official legal record of the oath you took. Now, the exact wording, well, it can vary a bit depending on the state and the type of document. But there are some key elements that are almost always included. First, it identifies you, the signer, as the one who's making the statement.
Okay, so it's like setting the scene. Who was there and where did it all take place?
That's a great way to put it. And then it goes on to state that you appeared before the notary public. That establishes the physical presence, which is crucial.
It's like saying, I was there in person in front of this official person.
Precisely. And then comes the real meat of the statement, the part where you actually swear to the truthfulness of the content. This is where you'll often see phrases like, being duly sworn deposes and says, or something similar. It's signaling that you're taking a formal oath under penalty of perjury. It's basically saying, everything I'm about to say is true, and I understand there are serious consequences if I'm lying.
It's like raising your right hand in court and swearing to tell the truth.
That's the essence of it. It's transforming a regular statement into a legally binding one, and the Jurat statement makes that transformation official. And to make things crystal clear, the statement will usually name the specific document you're swearing about. It might say something like, being duly sworn deposes and says that the foregoing instrument is true and correct to the best of his knowledge and belief.
So it's connecting the dots, the person, the oath, and the specific document they're swearing about. No room for ambiguity there.
Exactly. And finally, the notary signs the statement and adds their official seal and commission information. It's their way of saying, I witnessed this oath, and everything was done according to the rules.
So it's like a final seal of approval, a guarantee of authenticity.
Exactly. It's a lot of weight packed into a few lines.
It really is. Makes you realize how important it is to get everything right.
It is. A tiny error could have huge consequences.
And speaking of getting things right, we've talked a lot about how jurats need to be done by the book. But I'm curious, are there ever situations where a jurat notarization might be challenged or even thrown out? Like, what if the notary makes a mistake or there's some question about the validity of the process?
That's a great question. And it's important to remember that jurats, like any legal process, aren't completely foolproof. There are definitely times when a jurat might be questioned. One common issue is whether the notary was truly impartial.
Impartial, what do you mean by that?
Well, a notary is supposed to be neutral. They're there to verify identities and administer oaths, but they shouldn't have a personal interest in the outcome of what's being signed. If they do, or if they're close to the person signing, then their impartiality might be questioned.
So, like, if I got my best friend to notarize a document for me, that could be a problem.
Potentially, yes. It's always best to avoid even the appearance of bias.
Makes sense. What are some other red flags that could raise questions about a jurat?
Proper identification is a big one. The notary has a duty to carefully check the signer's ID. If there's any doubt, or if they don't really scrutinize it, the whole jurat could be challenged.
So no just glancing at a driver's license and waving them through.
Nope, they need to be thorough. Another critical issue is the signer's mental state. The notary needs to be reasonably sure that the person signing understands what they're doing and the seriousness of the oath. If the signer seems pressured or confused or not in their right mind, the jurat could be questioned.
So you wouldn't want someone swearing to something they don't fully understand.
Absolutely. It's all about ensuring a clear and informed consent.
Okay, so what happens if a jurat notarization is actually challenged? What's the process like?
Well, it can get a little complicated. Typically, the burden of proof falls on the person who's challenging the jurat. They have to prove that something was wrong. This might involve witness testimony, handwriting analysis, or even investigations into the notary's actions. It can get pretty intense.
It's like it can turn into a real legal battle.
It certainly can. And that's why it's so important for everyone involved in the process, whether they're the notary or the person signing, to be aware of the potential pitfalls and the importance of doing everything correctly.
So the key takeaway here is that even though jurats are a pretty common procedure, they're not something to be taken lightly.
Exactly. They have real legal weight, and it's important to treat them with the seriousness they deserve.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground so far. We've talked about the basic definition of a jurat, how the process works, the potential pitfalls, even the digital evolution of jurats with things like electronic signatures and remote notarizations.
It's amazing to see how technology is changing the landscape of something so traditional.
It really is. But before you move on, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, how jurat requirements can be different from state to state.
Right. Every state has its own set of rules.
And our listeners sent us information specifically about California and Florida. I'm curious to dig into those variations and see what kind of unique challenges they might present.
Good idea. Let's dive into those state-specific details. Let's start with California. They're known for having some of the most rigorous notarization laws in the country.
Okay, California it is. What makes their rules so strict?
Well, California has always been very meticulous about its legal processes, and notarization is no exception. They really want to minimize any risk of fraud. One of the key things you'll find in California is the specific wording they require in the Jurat certificate. Their notary handbook lays out the exact language you have to use, and there's no flexibility.
Wow, so no room for creativity or paraphrasing?
Nope, not in California. Any deviation from the prescribed wording and the whole notarization could be invalid.
So you really have to dot your I's and cross your T's.
Exactly. And another unique thing about California is something called the notarial journal.
A notarial journal, what's that?
Basically, it's a log that California notaries have to keep for every single notarization they perform. It includes details like the date, time, type of document, signer's information, even the ID they used. It's a permanent record of their actions.
Sounds like a lot of paperwork.
It is, but it's all about accountability and being able to trace things back if any questions arise.
So California is all about the details and the records. What about Florida? How do their rules compare?
Well, Florida is generally considered a bit more relaxed than California, but they still have their own quirks. One notable difference is that Florida allows for electronic notarial acts, which includes those electronic jurats we talked about earlier.
So Florida's embracing the digital age.
They are, but even with electronic notarizations, there are specific requirements. Electronic notaries in Florida have to use approved software, and they have to keep secure digital records. And another interesting thing about Florida is their provision for remote ink-signed notarization.
Remote ink-signed notarization. Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is a bit of a tongue twister, but it's basically a hybrid between traditional and electronic notarization. The signer actually signs the document in ink, but they don't have to be in the same room as the notary.
So they could be in different locations.
Exactly. They can appear before the notary remotely using video technology, and then the notary signs and seals the document separately.
So it's like a compromise between the old school way and the fully digital approach.
That's a good way to put it. It definitely adds flexibility. But with all these differences between states, how do you even know you're following the right rules? It seems like it could get pretty confusing, especially if you're dealing with documents that cross state lines. You're right, it can get tricky. My best advice: always consult with a qualified notary public who knows the specific rules in the state where the document will be used.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like having a knowledgeable notary in your corner is really important.
It really is. They can be your guide through this whole process and make sure everything is done correctly. And if you're dealing with a document that's going to be used in multiple states, it's even more crucial to get expert advice.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot in our Jurat deep dive today. We started with the basics and went all the way to electronic signatures and remote notarizations. It's amazing how technology is changing the way we do things, even something as old school as getting a document notarized.
It is. It's a fascinating intersection of law and technology.
It really is. But before we move on to part 2 of our deep dive, let's take a little break. We've covered a ton of information, so we'll give our listeners a chance to catch their breath and digest it all.
Sounds good. We've covered a lot of ground. We'll be back soon to explore even more of the fascinating world of Jurat notarizations.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're picking up where we left off, exploring the world of Jurat notarizations.
And it's a world that's changing fast, that's for sure,
Yeah.
with technology reshaping even these really traditional legal processes.
Exactly. We talked about electronic Jurats and remote online notarizations, or RON for short, and how they're really changing the game. But it makes me wonder, what does this mean for the future of Jurats?
It's a great question, and it's one that a lot of people are thinking about right now. Legal experts, technologists, they're all trying to figure out what the future holds. On one hand, you have this weight of tradition, right? The seriousness of taking an oath in person, face to face. But then on the other hand, you've got the convenience and accessibility of all these new digital platforms. So how do you balance those two?
It's almost like we're trying to recreate that moment in court, where you raise your right hand and swear to tell the truth, but doing it through a webcam.
You're right. With a traditional jurat, the notary can see you, they can observe your demeanor, they can get a sense of whether you really understand how serious the oath is. It's harder to do that in a digital environment.
Yeah, it's tough. But some of these on-platforms are trying different things, like recording the signing process, using facial recognition to verify identity. It's like they're building a digital paper trail to try to match the physical one.
They are, but the big question is, will it be enough? Will a judge view a digital jurat the same way they view a traditional one? It's kind of uncharted territory right now.
It really is a whole new frontier. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out.
Exactly, and it's not just the legal questions. There are bigger social implications, too. Like, as RON becomes more common, could it actually create more inequalities? For people who don't have access to technology or reliable internet, we don't want to end up in a situation where convenience comes at the cost of fairness.
That's such an important point. Technology should benefit everyone, not just those who are already plugged in.
I agree. We need to make sure that everyone has equal access to these important legal services.
Right. So how do we make sure that happens? It's not just about building the technology. It's about making sure it's available to everyone.
It's a challenge that will require collaboration between legal professionals, technologists, and policymakers. Everyone needs to work together to ensure that these changes are made thoughtfully and ethically.
Well said. It seems like this whole conversation about jurats highlights how important it is to really understand the details, especially as the landscape changes so quickly.
It does, and one detail that's easy to get confused about is the difference between a jurat and an acknowledgement.
Right, we touched on that before, but it's definitely worth emphasizing again. An acknowledgement is like confirming you got a package, while a jurat is swearing under oath that you didn't swipe it from your neighbor's porch.
That's the perfect analogy. And that difference in legal weight can be huge. Remember that example from the California Lawyers Association about the affidavit of death for joint tenants?
Yes, I remember that.
If someone challenged the validity of that affidavit, the fact that it was notarized with a jurat, meaning the signer swore under oath, that would carry much more weight in court than just a simple acknowledgement.
It's like putting your legal reputation on the line. You're not just saying, yep, I signed this thing. You're saying, I swear this is true, so help me God.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial for both notaries and signers to know the difference.
So we've got the jurat and acknowledgement distinction down. But I'm curious about the future. We've talked about how technology is changing the way we get things notarized, but could we ever see jurats become completely automated? Like, what if AI systems were verifying identities, analyzing documents, even administering oaths without any humans involved at all?
That's a really interesting thought. It's definitely within the realm of possibility. AI is already being used in different parts of the legal field.
And it sounds super efficient. Imagine AI systems processing jurats 2 mud 4 neuro. No need for scheduling appointments, making everything much faster.
It would certainly streamline things. From a practical perspective, it could reduce human error, make things accessible to people in remote areas. But like with any new technology, there are some potential downsides.
Right, like what?
Well, one big concern is bias. AI systems are trained on huge data sets, and if that data contains biases, then the AI could end up perpetuating those biases in its decisions.
It's like those examples we've seen in criminal justice, where algorithms end up discriminating against certain groups of people.
Exactly. We don't want those same problems happening in the legal process, especially with something as fundamental as notarization.
So it's not just about building the technology, it's about making sure it's used fairly and ethically.
Absolutely. And then there's the issue of transparency and accountability. AI systems can be really complex, and it can be hard to understand how they make their decisions. So if an AI system made a mistake in a jurat situation, it could be really difficult to figure out why and who's responsible.
That's a great point. It's not enough to just have the technology. We need to understand how it works.
Right. We need to be able to trust these systems, and that means understanding how they work and making sure they're accountable.
So it seems like the future of jurats is at a crossroads. We have the tradition of in-person oaths, focusing on human interaction and that solemn declaration. And then we have this potential for AI-powered systems that could change everything, but also raise some serious ethical concerns.
It's a balancing act, and the choices we make now will have a big impact on the future.
You know, this whole conversation has been fascinating, but I have to admit, one of the things that surprised me the most is that jurats have such ancient origins. You mentioned they go all the way back to Roman law.
They do. It's a fascinating journey through legal history.
I'd love to hear more about that. Take us back in time. Tell us how this whole jurat thing got started.
Okay, let's fire up the time machine. We're going back to ancient Rome. They loved their laws, and they were really meticulous about documenting everything. The Romans knew that it was super important to verify legal documents.
So they were already concerned about preventing fraud and making sure agreements were legally binding.
Absolutely. They understood that in a society built on laws and contracts, you needed a way to make sure people kept their promises. So they developed a system of oaths and witnesses, which basically laid the groundwork for what we know today as notarization.
So the seeds of jurats were planted back in ancient Rome.
Exactly. They even had individuals who were dedicated to this task, verifying identities, witnessing signatures, and as the Roman Empire spread, so did their legal practices. Over centuries, these practices adapted to different cultures and customs, but the core principles remain the same. Make sure written documents are reliable. Prevent fraud.
So even though the methods might have changed, the underlying goals have stayed consistent for centuries.
That's right. It speaks to this fundamental human need for trust and accountability. And as societies became more complex, the role of jurats and the people who administered them, it continued to evolve.
So how did that evolution play out?
Well, think about the impact of the printing press back in the 15th century.
It revolutionized the way information was spread.
It did. And it led to a huge increase in the use of written documents, which of course meant that there was a growing need for people to verify those documents. That's when we started to see guilds of notaries emerging, setting standards for training and ethical conduct. It's like notarization became a recognized profession.
So they were professionalizing the process.
Well, exactly. And those guilds played a really important role in maintaining the integrity of notaries and the documents they were handling. And then, as we move into the modern era, we see jurats becoming more more integrated into legal systems, more formal regulations, more oversight.
It's like they were being standardized and brought into the umbrella of the law.
Exactly. And of course, technology has played a huge role in this evolution too. From the typewriter to the computer to the internet, the way we create, share, and verify documents is constantly changing.
It's amazing how Jurats have managed to adapt and remain relevant through all those changes.
It really is. It shows how important those core principles are. Trust, accountability, the rule of law.
Well, that journey through history was fascinating. I had no idea Jurats had such a long and rich history.
It's a good reminder that even the most commonplace legal procedures often have deep roots, shaped by generations of people grappling with the same fundamental questions.
Those are some big questions, and as we move further into the digital age, it seems like those questions are becoming even more important.
Absolutely. Understanding the history of these practices can help us as we face new challenges and opportunities.
So we've journeyed through history, tackled oaths, and even peeked into the future.
It's been quite the exploration.
It really has. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, perjury. We've talked about jurats involving swearing oaths, but what happens when someone breaks that oath? What are the consequences of lying under oath in a legal setting?
That's a big question, and it goes to the heart of why these jurats matter so much. Perjury is a serious offense because it undermines the whole foundation of our legal system.
Let's break that down a little bit. What exactly is perjury? Is it just any lie you tell in court or something?
Perjury is very specific. It means you intentionally make a false statement under oath in a legal proceeding or in any situation where the law requires an oath.
So it's not just about telling a little white lie. It's about intentionally deceiving the court.
That's right. And it's not limited to courtrooms either. Perjury can happen in depositions, affidavits, even when you're signing legal documents that require a jurat.
Wow, so those oaths carry some serious weight. But how do you actually prove perjury? It seems like it would be tough to show what someone was thinking when they said something.
You're right. Proving perjury is tricky. It's not enough to just show that someone said something false. You have to prove that they knew it was false when they said it and that they did it on purpose to mislead the court.
So it's about proving intent.
Exactly. And that often means looking for things like inconsistencies in their statements, evidence from other people that contradicts their story, or even a motive to lie.
It's like putting together a puzzle trying to figure out what really happened.
It can be, and because perjury is taken so seriously, the consequences can be pretty harsh.
Okay, let's talk consequences. What happens if someone is actually convicted of perjury?
Well, the punishment depends on a few factors, like where it happened and how serious the offense was. But in many places, perjury is a felony, which means it could mean years in prison. There can also be fines, probation, and of course, your reputation takes a major hit.
So it's not something to take lightly. It really drives home the importance of telling the truth.
It does. But are there ever situations where someone could be accused of perjury even if they didn't mean to lie? What if they made a genuine mistake or misremembered something?
That's a good question. What happens then?
That's where the concept of materiality comes in. Not every false statement under oath is automatically perjury. For it to be perjury, the lie has to be material to the case, meaning it could have actually affected the outcome.
So it's not just about whether you lied. It's about whether that lie could have changed the course of the case.
That's right. And that's why intent is so important. If you truly believe something is true, even if it turns out to be false, you might not be guilty of perjury. The key is whether you knowingly and intentionally lied to deceive the court.
It's like the difference between a mistake and a deliberate deception.
Exactly. And that's why perjury cases often come down to witness testimony and interpreting the evidence to try to figure out what the person's real intent was.
So it's not always black and white. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to perjury.
There is. And it's a good reminder that everyone involved in legal proceedings, whether they're a witness, a defendant, or even just someone signing a document that requires a jurat, they need to understand how serious it is. It's about upholding the integrity of the entire system.
Well said. This whole deep dive into perjury has been fascinating, but a little unsettling too.
It is a serious topic, and it's a good reminder that oaths and sworn statements are the cornerstones of our legal system.
Absolutely. So we've explored the history of jurats, the difference between jurats and acknowledgments, the potential for AI and notarization, and the seriousness of perjury.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. But before we wrap up this part of our exploration, I wanted to shift gears a bit and talk about something closely related to jurats, and that's legal language.
Oh, legal language. It's a fascinating topic.
It is. We talked earlier about how the specific wording of a jurat statement is so important, how it transforms a simple statement into a sworn declaration with legal consequences. It's like those words have a kind of legal magic to them.
They do. And to understand that magic, we need to look at what makes legal language different from everyday speech.
Okay, let's break it down. What makes legalese so special?
Well, one of the most noticeable things about legal language is its formality. It often uses archaic terms, Latin phrases, really complex sentence structures, stuff you don't hear in casual conversation.
It's like dressing up in a suit and tie for a special occasion.
Exactly. The language signals that this is a serious legal matter. Another key feature is precision. Legal language is all about being clear and unambiguous, leaving no room for misinterpretation. This is especially important in a jurat statement, where the wording needs to accurately reflect the oath and the specific document.
So there's no room for ambiguity or misinterpretation.
Not when it comes to legal documents. And to achieve this precision, legal language uses a lot of specialized vocabulary. Words like depose, affiant, instrument. These words have very specific meanings in the legal world.
So it's like learning a whole new language.
It kind of is. And to make things extra clear, legal language often uses redundancy, repeating ideas in slightly different ways.
Just to make absolutely sure there's no room for misunderstanding.
Precisely. And finally, legal language tends to be very structured and formulaic. There are specific conventions and patterns they follow. This helps to make sure everything is consistent and predictable.
It's like a recipe. You follow the steps carefully to make sure the end result is correct.
Yeah.
But with all this formality and precision, doesn't legal language sometimes become a bit, well, confusing for regular people?
That's a common complaint about legalese, and it's a fair point. The challenge is to strike a balance between precision and accessibility.
Right, because the law is supposed to serve the people, not confuse them.
Exactly. And there's actually a growing movement in the legal world to make legal writing clearer and more accessible to the average person. Some places are even passing laws that require legal documents to be written in plain language.
It sounds like there's a push to simplify things.
There is. It's about making the legal system more transparent and user-friendly for everyone.
Well, that was a fascinating look into the world of legal language. It's amazing how something as simple as words can have such a huge impact on our legal system.
It is. Language is a powerful tool.
Well said. And with that thought-provoking insight, we're going to wrap up this part of our Jurat deep dive. We've talked about history, legal language, perjury, and even AI. It's been quite the exploration.
It has, but our journey's not over yet. We've got more to uncover in part 3 of our deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Jurat notarizations today. And wow, we've covered a lot of ground, from those ancient Roman origins to the possibility of AI-powered notaries in the future.
It really has been quite a journey, exploring sworn statements and all these legal safeguards.
It really has. But before we sign off, I want to go back to something we were talking about in the last part. This idea of legal language as a powerful tool that shapes and defines our interactions.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how certain words and phrases carry so much weight in a legal context.
Absolutely. And it makes me think about this broader issue of trust and authenticity in a world that's becoming more digital every day.
That's a crucial point. As more of our lives move online, how do we translate these traditional ideas of oaths and sworn statements and legal verification into this digital format?
Right. How do we recreate that feeling of raising your right hand in a courtroom and swearing to tell the truth? How do we capture that same sense of gravity and consequence when everything's happening online?
It's a challenge, and it's one that's going to require a lot of creative thinking and collaboration between legal experts, technologists, policymakers, everyone, really. We need to figure out how to design systems that are secure, transparent, and easy for people to use.
And we need to educate people about how to navigate this digital world safely and responsibly. How to verify information online and protect themselves from fraud. It's like digital literacy is becoming as important as reading and writing were in the past.
Absolutely. We need to foster this culture of digital responsibility, where everyone understands that the same rules apply online as they do offline. It's about building trust in the digital realm, step by step.
It's like we're building a whole new legal system for the internet. One that reflects the values and principles that have guided us for centuries, but adapted to this new digital reality. Who knows what the future holds? Maybe we'll have Jurat notarizations happening in virtual reality, with avatars swearing oaths. Or maybe blockchain technology will revolutionize how we verify identities. The possibilities are pretty mind-blowing.
They are. But one thing's for sure, those core principles, trust, accountability, the pursuit of truth, those will always be essential.
Absolutely. Those are the bedrock of any justice system, whether it's in a physical courtroom or in a digital space.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Jurat notarizations. We've explored their history, their purpose, the challenges they face in the digital age, and what it all means for trust and authenticity in our world.
We've talked about legal language, perjury, even AI, all these different pieces of the puzzle.
It really has been quite a journey.
It has.
So to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've learned something new and gained a deeper understanding of how Jurats work and why they matter.
And remember, the pursuit of knowledge never ends. Keep asking questions. Stay curious.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Make sure to check out our show notes for links to all the sources we talked about. And if you have any topics you'd like us to explore, let us know. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.